Hey there, Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. This is one of my 21-day challenge participants. They just finished up their challenge. Dad sent me, he sent me a before swing of a front toss, so he sent me an after swing of front toss. But I want you to know, if you have a 21-day challenge, you don't have an awesome setup like this in the garage where you can do front toss, you can still get it done. All the drills are from the tee. We're working on isolating certain movements, certain feelings, and I was just lucky enough to get an after of the front toss. And so what I want to talk about is something that most of you with young players struggle with. You have a perfect tee swing, and then suddenly your player starts to break down when the pitch ball comes. And you see this on the left in his before swing. And we're going to talk about, I think, how you can start to alleviate this with just understanding a certain principle here that's not at play over here on the left, that is on the right. Now, first off, I will say there's a lot of things that can cause a player to break down. Obviously, if a player was scared of the ball, they may be more reactive as they're first doing the whole, making sure the ball's not going to hit them, and then they have to react late. That's one of the reasons why players break down. But typically, it's a timing issue with young players. They don't have a good understanding of how to move their weight, and so especially in this process. And so I'm going to teach you how this player has really changed his whole entire future, not just by working on these mechanisms. That's another reason, but I'm assuming that if your player has really good, has what you see on the tee, or she has what you want on the tee, and then doesn't do it in the games, this is probably the reason. All right, so I'm going to back up here. Again, none of the challenge had anything to do with timing or timing up the pitched ball. Right? We just had certain feelings we were working on, and some of these feelings naturally bring about this result that you're going to see. If you notice the difference of where the ball is in space when the player has their front foot down, this on the right is extremely important for your player to start adopting. Not that they just keep their front shoulder down, not that they keep everything back. The reason they have to be able to comfortably get the front foot down with everything back. And this is all about what I consider setting myself up to stay behind the ball. And it starts with the weight shift process. If you watch on the left, this is very typical of young players. Again, this young man's dad played at a high level, and so he's got good genetics and all that, but this is a very common thing you'll see with young players, is that their idea of moving their weight, you see in the very beginning, a great idea they had here. He's kind of sitting into his load leg, really getting into his legs there. But from here forward, everything is moving away from his back leg. He's pushing his weight off his back leg. And what ends up happening, and this happens with a lot of young players, because when they're trying to do their weight shift, their idea of a weight shift, let's face it, you demonstrated, and all they see is forward movement. You may be, Dad, feeling exactly the right thing, but what they see is you moving forward, right? And so what do? They emulate that. They move forward. Or some coaches tell players, hey, step to the ball, step into it. And really, it's the opposite feeling that you want to have here, in my opinion, as you learn the game. Because what ends up happening is they start to push their body forward as the ball is coming forward. And something really important happens in this phase. As the central nervous system, here I go trying to be smart. As the central nervous system begins to send signals to the brain as they're moving forward and the ball's coming towards them, the central nervous system says, uh-oh, you better hurry up. So this is where the breakdown comes from. And so what ends up happening is players become reactive. They become reactive, and once you become reactive, you become defensive as a hitter. So none of this means you can't hit a ball. Right? You see it hits a really hard ground ball here. None of this means you can't hit a ball. Right? It just means you become reactive and you take yourself out of being offensive, as you see over here on the right. So many of you won't see a whole lot of difference in the weight shift here, but I'm going to describe it here in just a second. But I want you to watch how he's allowing himself now to get a full swing through the ball, whereas over on the right, he's going to be reactive and just kind of flip the bat at the ball. All right, so what's happening here is I think, really important to understand. That by staying back, or the feeling that I'm staying back and I'm staying behind the ball, gives a player a better opportunity to read and recognize what the ball is doing in space. Right? This player, because he's controlling his weight shift better and understanding how the weight shift is supposed to work, is now able to predict better, especially in a front toss environment like this. Right, dads? We're trying to give players good pitches to hit, and we're not trying to trick players in front toss. And so the velocity is a little bit controlled. We're allowing them to get reps in where they're working on the mechanics. And ultimately what happens, and this happens in 12U games and below because the velocity sometimes is not that fast, balls are dropping, right? And so what ends up happening to a player when they're pushing their weight towards the ball, that drop happens a little bit later, right? And so then they have to react to the drop and their body breaks down. Right? That's a lot of the stuff that you're seeing. This is why it's really prevalent. You might as well forget it in coach pitch when you got a 6-foot tall pitcher throwing from, I don't know, what is it, 40 feet, and the ball is dropping off a table, and dads are trying to get their kids to keep everything back. Man, that is really hard for coach pitch because what they're doing is they're reacting to the ball falling. Right? And so if my timing doesn't allow me to sit back and read and recognize what the ball is doing, then I'm going to break down. That's all there is to it. And so you can see that's why it's important that a player learns to move their weight so they look at, you can't even see the ball here. And this isn't one of those reach out and stop moments. I'm stopping the video, right? But the ball's not even in the video. It's not even on the screen, right? Which allows him perfect timing to where he can unload his entire swing through the ball. And watch, this ball's dropping, folks. But imagine what's happening right now as he sits back. What's he doing? He's recognizing, right? Reading and recognizing is really important for adjustments in this game. And young players don't do that. They react. And oftentimes they react too late. Okay, so what did we do? All right, well, first off, we got to get a player to feel something that's very important in the weight shift process. They've got to start buying into, you can see from the top, still got that little bit of a load into his back leg. But from here forward, I want this player to always feel that presence. I don't care how far the front foot goes up. I don't care how high if he wants to lift his knee. I don't care about any of that. I want a player to feel like they're in their backside the entirety. And this is why when this young man gets to the ground, we didn't work on a different hip movement. We didn't work on dragging the back leg. We didn't work on any of that. This is why you see flexion in his back leg. And over here on the right, his leg begins to straighten out. Why? Because these two players are doing something different. This player is saying, I'm going to hit the ball with this. And this player is saying, I'm going to hit the ball with this. Complete different shift in philosophy as this player naturally allows himself to sit back and stay behind the ball. This player pushes his weight and has to be reactive. That's the reason why your player breaks down on the pitched ball, because they just need a better understanding of how this process works. I'm staying here, I'm staying here, I'm staying here. And probably the most important thing that you should start looking for, not the most important, one of the most important things is in terms of weight shift, especially if your player has a tendency to want to push their weight. And this dad recognized that, and it was one of the comments he made in the before swing that he sent me. Is he said he really gets off his backside too early, doesn't stay grounded long enough, right? And that's what staying on your backside. You see how his heel is still, for all practical purposes, it's still in the ground when he lands in his weight shift, right? And then obviously his back leg's gonna move, but we get caught in this world right now because bug squishing is terrible, right? We hate bug squishing, and so but we get the cart before the horse. We say, all right, now when you get here, I need you to make sure your back leg does whatever, right? And the reality is when a player learns to stay in their backside the correct way, that when they unload the bat, their backside is going to do more than you think. Now that doesn't mean that we want, if your player's not getting into a position where, they're getting all of this through the ball, right, then that could be a problem, right? But first things first, again, we're dealing with young players here. We're not dealing with Josh Donaldson yet. This kid's going to be better than Josh Donaldson, right? Is he staying in his backside, staying in his backside, staying in his backside, right? That's the key. Staying in the ground. This is ultimately the building blocks for ground force. Ground force is not how hard I push against the ground. Ground force is making sure that a player feels like they're in the ground the entire process of the swing. Does that mean that a player's not going to get off their backside? No, but your goal should not be pushing away from your backside, right? This will really make it difficult for a player to control their ability to read and recognize the pitch coming in, and ultimately that's why young players break down. Now, the 21-day challenge has a lot of pieces to it. You know, the majority of what we do in the 21-day challenge is working on these mechanisms, trying to help a player understand, right, what it means to unload the bat, how they're going to move the bat through space. You can see here, this, you know, it almost brings a tear to my eye, you know, looking at the difference. And if you look at these two swings, I think most people would say, well, there's not a whole lot of difference. The reality is if you look at the top hand arm, if you just look at the top hand arm, this is what kids love to do with the bat, right? It makes so much sense to them to take this arm and just try to rotate the barrel at the ball. And so what ends up happening is from the elbow to their top hand, they rotate that piece at the ball. And so they always have pull side extensions, no matter what. They never get through the zone because they're always cutting it off, because that top hand arm is not going through the ball. It's cutting across the ball. This is why a lot of you dads that struggle with, oh, well, he hits the ball a lot, he or she hits the ball to right field really hard, rarely pulls the ball, or when they pull the ball, it's on the ground. It's because they're not allowing themselves the room to get their top hand arm into a position where they can get it behind the ball and drive it, right? That's why you see this beautiful swing. The extension goes right back to where the ball was pitched, right? And it's fantastic. Now, that doesn't mean that if this player gets something really cooked on the inner half that he's probably going to have a pull side extension. If he gets a ball away, he's probably going to have an opposite way extension. But the main component here is you got to teach your players what are these mechanisms in the upper half supposed to do? Well, they got to get behind the ball so I can destroy a ball. Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. Thanks.